This is the KJ Singh Show with your host, KJ Singh. So, the foremost, most well known atheist, known as Richard Dawkins, has declared that he's a cultural Christian. And even if he had to choose between different religions, he would call himself a Christian. Which begs the question, really, whether the new atheist movement was a grift, jumping and piggybacking off the so-called war on terror. And I'm here to give the case that actually Richard Dawkins and what we call the horsemen of the apocalypse, the new horsemen of the apocalypse that are part of the new atheist movement, Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens, Daniel Dennett, amongst others, these people were 10 years ago or so, were grifters, and some of them still are. Because first of all, and I say this as somebody who's an agnostic and somebody who actually listened to these people, were fans of these people, was particularly a fan of Sam Harris for various reasons. And I'm going to do a future video as to why I think Sam Harris is actually a psychopath. So please like, comment, and subscribe to watch that video. But I'm an agnostic. I'm open to the possibilities of the universe. But sounds very grandiose. But I'm open to the possibility of God, but also the possibility that there is no God. However, the whole atheist movement was, looking back at it, was quite a bit ridiculous actually, because anyone can make an argument for there being no God. I mean, it's very, it's, if you were to just rely on our senses alone, it's very easy to make the argument. And also, if you look at history, how historical, precedents showed that we went from adopting religion or religious aspects of paganism and incorporating it into the new religions of monotheism, how human civilization has always believed in one god or another, or some sort of supernatural spirit. And so we can ascertain from that the psychology of the psychological need to have a kind of religious ideology as a way to center human civilization, community around, and bring some sort of meaning, purpose, some sort of belief, so as to soften the blows of life, which especially historically was incredibly cruel. People would be killed in war just arbitrarily. People would die of lack of food, of just everyday illnesses that we now have a lot of them, the cures for, in the form of modern medicine and science. However, I'm not here to make the case that why, for example, I do not believe in a God, or I do believe in a God, because I'm here to talk about how Richard Dawkins and the so-called new atheist movement was actually a grift. And it's a hard pill to swallow if you are a fan of these guys. And I was a big fan of these guys. But I'm here to tell you that it's if you look at the timing in which these people arose, it was very shortly after the war on terror. And it's my hypothesis is that following the war on terror, so-called terror, people were able to see the futility of how religion is being played out in our modern era, especially from the point of view of being born in the West, where we have our certain luxuries, we have a certain stability that countries around the world don't have, because they're laden with conflict. They have a certain level of instability in their lives, partly driven by conflict between different tribes, different religions. But this is a kind of a form of armchair philosophers kind of way of looking at the world, because when we look at how conflict arises, religion is merely it's not a driver. It's not the main cause for the reason why we have an expansionist view or expansion of war. Often religion is used as a call to action to bring people together and to kind of give a morale to people, but it isn't the primary cause. And if we look at, let's say, what's happening with regards to Sam Harris, and I'm going to talk about more of this in future, and so how they view Hamas as a religious fundamentalist kind of organization. Actually, they're first and foremost a colonial or a resistance movement, whereby they use religion as a kind of a tool with which they can congregate the people, collectivize. Because of course Hamas don't have a problem with Christian Palestinians, of course, and in fact it's interesting that the first ones who arose in violent resistance in Palestine were actually Christian Palestinians, which we don't hear a lot of. It's not particularly convenient to the narrative that the new atheists and the generally liberal centrists and right wingers in our culture use. We like to assign certain blame based on a religious interpretation, but the way why do people interpret religion in a certain way? And if you look at, let's say, how ISIS came into power, it was due to a hole in power, in a political and power vacuum left by the invasion of Iraq, whereby Saddam Hussein was ousted. So, and we look at the Islamic Revolution of Iran, that was due to the fact that the people had to get rid of the Shah, who was installed by the West. And before the Shah, they had Mohammad Mossadegh, who was a liberal, democratically elected leader, who was literally ousted by the West. So if you look at how religious fundamentalism rises, in vast majority of cases, it is due to intervention from the West. So if you really want to reduce, religious fundamentalism, you do it by diplomacy, by seeing the people that you're trying to suppress or subjugate their liberal, even their liberal leanings towards, people have an intense need for having their voices heard. I feel like democracy is a natural way to, in a kind of like a stable society, to act. But when you're constantly trying to subjugate people or like trying to, coerce them into supporting a certain narrative, you have to do it through violent means or and so people will resist that. So it's very common for people in the West to look down on these different factions, but the West has a big part to play in this. So when we look at the rise of religious fundamentalism, it's really it's not a surprise that people look at it and see it as extreme. And it's and you can very clearly see kind of the religious scriptures that they use to interpret and justify their wars. That's very clear. But it's interesting that the same so-called liberal centrists who point fingers at passages in the Quran, and I'm myself, my family are Sikh. I have respect for all people of all religions, but I had a moment in time where I would look at passages from all religious texts, and I would see this is crazy. But most people don't see religion in kind of in that way, in terms of in literal interpretation of scripture. But it's interesting because the Quran, you can look at passages and say this is quite violent. But the Old Testament, the Talmud, the Torah, is far more violent in a far more genocidal way. And it's interesting that when Benjamin Netanyahu makes references to the Amalek, liberal centrists, people like Sam Harris don't look at this and say this is religious fundamentalism. And the real implications of this interpretation are more, manifest in the world. Like just literal genocide is happening right now. And the people of Gaza are facing the brunt of that. Which leads me on to, the real question is whether this new atheist movement, with Richard Dawkins saying that he's a cultural Christian, with people like Sam Harris or these other people who might identify with Israel or identify with defending Israel, maybe they were more of a Western supremacist. They had a Western supremacist view of religion, and essentially they didn't have a serious problem with Christianity in the same that they had with the Middle East. But their understanding of how religion works, without understanding history or politics, was a completely dumb view of how religion is interpreted by people. People will interpret religion based on the context in which they're living in. If you're really forcing somebody's hand, you're really suppressing them, oppressing them, they will interpret religion in a certain way. So as a way to, regain their dignity. And this is something, the psychological aspect, as well as the politics and the news, history, these are all things that are not being integrated into the worldview of the new atheist. And so I do believe it was a kind of a grift, kind of ignorance, and also a form of Western supremacy that led people to to kind of build a career on this, or latch on this. And I'd say this, before I end, there are many things that Richard Dawkins done that I can respect, like in his work in evolutionary biology. The Greatest Show on Earth, one of his books, is one, it's amazing. And Sam Harris, he's got a book on free will, which I very much enjoyed. And these people are, especially Richard Dawkins or Daniel Dennett or Christopher Hitchens. These people had already established careers in their respective fields, and I could respect them for that. But it's a bit like when Elon Musk, let's say, you could respect him for his logistics and his ability to do business, his ability to sell himself. But when Elon Musk talks about politics or current affairs or the COVID situation, he's incredibly dumb. In the same way with how Sam Harris or Richard Dawkins talk about religion and how that's been interpreted, it's very dumb. And all it is really it turns out to be just a notion that is based on ignorance, a lack of understanding, and essentially it leads to Western supremacy, where you can literally give license to genocide, not understanding the implications that when you essentialize people, essentially make no difference between the actual people and the religion that they may be part of or be born into. And that's another thing. Most people are born into religion, and their religion is is a kind of a cultural and a community based kind of collectivism. Which there's no problem with community. Being having religion as a glue. It's not like these new atheists are going to completely rid these people of their religion, through just logical facts, because there are emotional elements, there are political elements, and there are historical elements that these people are not acknowledging. And it just leads to a clash of civilizations, whereby you have Christianity versus Islam, and Richard Dawkins is playing into that game where he's saying and doing most ignorant things, such as siding with religion rather than having a humanitarian, universalist view of society, with seeing people as equals. Because I assure you, people who are born into Islam are just people like you and I. I see, and the very fact that people may be born into fundamentalist kind of societies should be a reason to have greater empathy rather than less empathy, because I see a big difference between the actual blood, the sweat, the tears of the person, and the actual ideology that may be imposed or maybe learnt into them, or educated and indoctrinated into them. And we need to make a separation between the two. Otherwise, you end up essentializing them, and then you end up making no difference between also political ideologies such as Hamas and the actual people who are Palestinians. And so we also need to make a separation between politics and human beings too, because politics is merely, people aren't born Hamas. Hamas are, a reaction, they're a response to the political realities that people in Gaza are facing. And of course, they were supported and facilitated by, Hamas was supported and facilitated by Benjamin Netanyahu, which is a inconvenient fact based on leaked recordings in 2019, where he boasted about supporting them as a way to separate and kind of play divide and rule politics with the Palestinian self-determination and to thwart the possibility of a Palestinian state. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like, comment, and subscribe. I'll be doing more videos along this lines, and of course, currently we are in incredibly dire situation regarding Rafah. Benjamin Netanyahu, he made it adamantly clear that he will engage in a ground invasion in Rafah. In which case, I'll be following that on this channel too. But this is a serious humanitarian disaster, which of course it's interesting that people like Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris aren't pointing out. They're not seeing how religious fundamentalists are, utilizing this conflict to justify genocide. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like, comment, and subscribe. That'd be very much appreciated.